Hi, and welcome back to the EPCC Culinary Arts Chef Share Series developed for YouTube in conjunction with EPCC TV. Today, we are going to be talking about fresh pasta. Once again, I'm Chef Rosser back with you. This pasta course is going to be cut into two parts. The first part is going to be fresh pasta in the sheet style. So these are easy to make at home, very easy to make in a restaurant setting. There's not a lot of equipment or ingredients needed for this. We're going to use very simple pasta sheeting machines like this guy here. There's KitchenAid attachments, and then there's more expensive motorized mechanical pieces, but simply what we're going to do is we're going to make pasta dough and then sheet it down to size between rollers, and then we're going to cut it into whatever shape we need it to be. So today we're going to look at a linguine or a fettuccine application from the sheet pasta. We're just going to cut it down into ribbons. We're also going to take a look at a ravioli preparation so that you can see how we use these sheets to create raviolis. Very simple process. Hope you guys enjoy it and let us know what you think. Always remember, like, follow, and share of the videos, and let us know what you want to see in the future. Thanks again, hope you enjoy it. So the first thing we need to do for our pasta is make the dough. So in this bowl I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of semolina flour. Now semolina is a hard wheat flour, and that's what's going to really produce a lot of gluten once we add the water. You can play around with the ratios. You can use all-purpose flour. I would not recommend trying to use all semolina flour. The dough will be too hard to work with. So this 2-to-1 ratio, you can play around with that. I like a little bit of semolina. You could go 4-to-1, whatever the case is. So for 3 cups of flour total, remember 2 all-purpose, 1 semolina, I'm going to use 3 eggs and about 1/3 of a cup of water. Now into this 1/3 cup of water, which I got out hot, it was very hot water, I dissolved a teaspoon of salt into that. To that, I'm going to add about 1 tablespoon of olive oil and my 3 eggs. And what this comes out to about is a cup of liquid. All right, so I'm going to whisk up my eggs, just break them a little bit, get everything mixed in there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to mix up my flours. All right, you want this really nice and blended. And it should start looking about like cornmeal once you get them blended. And just so you know, cornmeal is not a flour that you would want to use in pasta production because it doesn't have any gluten. So to that, we are going to pour in our liquid mixture, and we're going to work from the center out. Just start incorporating that liquid, working from the center out. Now you can build a well on the cutting board and do the same thing. A lot of Italian books and videos will show you that same methodology. This works just as well, and it's a little neater. So you'll see that paste coming together in the center, and it's very liquid, very wet, and this is going to dry out significantly as we incorporate more of that flour into it, to the point where we're going to have trouble incorporating the last little bit of flour into it. So I'm going to do that by hand, and I'll show you guys that in just a little bit. Try not to make a mess on the counter yet. All right, so my fork has pretty much done its job. It's time to go in with my hands, and I'm just going to start folding this in together, getting the wet and the dry combined. And what I'm going to look for is a cohesive mass of dough. And it's going to be kind of ugly, but once I get it together in the bowl, I'm going to turn it out onto the counter and start doing some kneading on it. And it's firming up quite a bit right now. because of all that semolina flour. It really attracts the water and then starts that gluten development. So we're just going to keep pushing the dry flour into the wet mass. Just keep pushing it around, kneading as we're going. And once it's all at least stuck to the surface, I can turn it out onto the counter and finish the kneading process. Now what I'm looking for from this in the end, before I rest it, and this has to rest for about an hour at room temperature. You can rest it for a couple hours in the refrigerator, but you want to bring it back out to room temperature before you start working it. But what I'm going to be looking for is the surface of this to feel cool and dry, not tacky and not warmed up from the heat of my hands in the kneading process. So the amount of moisture that you get in here is really critical. If it's too wet, after it rests, this dough is going to be really wet and sloppy because the resting process is going to allow the gluten strands to relax, and it would be difficult to work with. So playing around with it, it's really something you need to experience with your hands to feel it. That's why I'm not doing this in a mixer. If I was doing a larger batch than this, I might put it in the mixer, but I always take it out and finish it by hand just to make sure I have enough moisture or not too much in there. And with pasta doughs, it's much easier to dry them out if they're too wet than it is to get water into them if they're too dry. If they're too dry, they don't want to open up and take that water. So it's better to have a dough that's a little too wet. And then during this kneading process, I would just sprinkle it with dry flour until I got it to the consistency and texture that I wanted. Now, because of the semolina flour, this is never going to be that smooth, elastic mass of dough. And I'm really putting a lot of power into this because the gluten has really developed quite a bit. But I'll turn this guy over. And you've got a rough kind of mottled surface, and that's fine. Once this relaxes, we're gonna have that nice, smooth, elastic dough that we're looking for. So I'm gonna give it a couple more turns just to make sure everything's incorporated. I don't wanna overwork it because really at that point, it's kind of self-defeating. It just becomes too difficult to work with. So if I touch the surface of this, it feels cool and dry, not tacky, but you can feel the moisture in there, all right? So the next thing I'm gonna do with this is I am going to, let me wipe my counter real quick, is I'm gonna roll this out into a disc and then cover it with plastic wrap and let it sit for, like I said, at least an hour at room temperature to let that gluten relax. And this is really difficult under the rolling pin right now. And I just want just a rough disc shape. And you can see it is quite textured. Nothing wrong with that. It's gonna smooth out beautifully after it's rested up. All right, so I've got my rough disc. I'm gonna get some plastic wrap. And I like to wrap this in a couple of different directions. I do at least 2 layers of plastic on it. You want to make sure to get all of the air out of that. Any air in the plastic will allow this to dry out. I'm going to show you guys a neat little trick to use before you let it rest for the hour. So I've got my 2 layers of plastic pushing air out. Once I've got my disc wrapped, I'm gonna put the rolling pin back on it again and just smooth it out inside that plastic. What this is gonna do is all of those rough edges are gonna smooth out, and it's gonna make a better dough for handling later on. So I just do that on both sides. And I know it might be difficult to see, but a couple of things happen. It's smoothed out dramatically in there, but I'm also creating that rectangle shape that's gonna be great for me cutting and portioning to sheet this piece out. So I'm gonna set this aside, let it rest for an hour, and we'll come back and we'll take a look at our processes of cutting the strand pasta, which is the linguine or the fettuccine, and then making our raviolis. We'll be right back. Pasta dough has been resting for an hour. I'm gonna go ahead and uncover it, and I wanna save the plastic that I wrapped it in, because any portion of this pasta dough that you're not working on really needs to be wrapped airtight. It will dry out tremendously and become super difficult to work with. So I'm just gonna real simply cut this into quarters, rewrap it, and use only 1/4 at a time. So get that wrapped, and then this one. So the first thing we need to do is get it ready to go into the pasta sheeter. I'm going to be using a KitchenAid attachment. Like I said, you can use the old-fashioned hand crank. They work really well. The KitchenAids are great if you do this more often. But if this is something you're only going to do infrequently, there's no need to spend the money on the equipment like this. It can get a little pricey. So before we put this in, we need to stretch this out a little bit. So I'm going to use my French pin to just start getting this into the shape I want it. And it is really nice. It's a nice dough. It's still cool and dry to the touch, which is exactly what I want, but it is sheeting nicely. So just getting the shape ready to go in here. We don't want to stress this machine by trying to jam pasta in there that is too thick. Now, one thing that we want to have on handy at all times is a little bit of flour. If this dough is a little too dry, if this dough is a little too wet, we want to dust it lightly with some flour. Don't get too much on there because it'll act as a lubricant and it won't go through. But dusting it with a little bit of flour will help dry it out and make it easier to handle. And it'll prevent it from sticking together once the pasta is cut into its final shape. Okay? So to do this, we don't want to turn our mixer on too high. So medium, low at the widest setting for the rollers, and then we're just going to go ahead and start putting that through. So immediately we see results. And I got one hand for the pasta to feed it and one hand to catch it. And if this gets too big, don't be afraid to cut it. And for this fettuccine, I want to leave it relatively thick. So I'm going to take it down to 3 or 4. I want to see how thick it is once I get it through. It's on number 4 right now. And I think that's good enough for a fettuccine. Let me turn this guy off. So we're at about 1/16 of an inch. So at this point, what I want to do is cut my noodles. But I don't want noodles that long on my plate. They would be difficult for your guests to handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this guy in half, crease it, and then just real simply cut it. All right? That's going to be the length of the pasta. All right? So that's a much more manageable length. All right? So I'm going to take off this fitting, and I'm going to get my fettuccine fitting. Now, if you take a look at this, the cutters just simply overlap at about a 1/4 inch gap, so it's going to cut. Real simple process. We'll go ahead and screw this guy in here, lock it down, and get our pasta through. After that, we're going to put it on the drying rack for a little bit, just to dry it out slightly so that it's easier to handle and it cooks a little more consistently. And I like a little bit lower speed on this process just to let it cut thoroughly. And if you get some stragglers falling off, that's fine. It's just those edges. All right, And I'm gonna pull off some of those ugly edges because I don't want those on a plate. And then there is my fettuccine nicely cut. All right, so I'm just gonna drape this over the drying rack. Gently. And you don't have to put it all on one. There's plenty of room here. We can move it around. That is gonna help this not stick together, and it's gonna take a little bit of the moisture off of the surface so that it cooks more evenly and consistently. Let me fix that. Okay, there we go. Let's get our next piece cut, and then we'll start cooking. So for our pasta saute, we're gonna go ahead and get our boiling salted water nice and hot, get that going. And while that's working, we are going to saute, crisp up some nice bacon lardones. Now these were cured in-house. We don't have pancetta, but we got fresh bacon. So we're gonna use what we have. So we're just gonna leave these on about medium heat and just get them nice and crispy, and then we'll take them out, and that's gonna be our garnish. Once those are nice and crispy, then we can start the saute process, and we will cook our pasta at the same time. Now, one thing we need to remember with fresh pastas is that they cook very quickly, in a fraction of the time that it would take to cook a boxed pasta. So you need maybe 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the size of the pasta and how thick it is. It's super quick, so just keep that in mind when making fresh pasta. A box pasta will cook for 12, 13 minutes. These 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes at the most, okay? We'll be right back once these are done. So our bacon lardones are nice and crisped up, got really good color. We don't want to get them too hot. This happens pretty quickly. So we're gonna get these out. I'm gonna drain off the excess oil, and then we're gonna start the saute process for our pasta dish. But we don't want all of that oil in there. I'm just gonna keep a little bit in the pan for the blistered tomatoes. Our boiling water is ready, so we'll get to that in just a minute. I'm gonna turn this guy on, nice and high. And the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna blister some nice tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are everywhere in the summer, great flavors. By blistering them, we're putting them in a smoking hot pan. What we're gonna do is concentrate the flavors, give them a little bit of char on the outside, and loosen up the skin, because the skins on these guys can be a little thick. So a really nice presentation, especially for a pasta dish. All right, so our pan's smoking hot. We're gonna get those in there. And you gotta be careful, sometimes they'll pop and splatter. And while those are going, see how that skin chars up nicely? Beautiful. All right. That's exactly what we're looking for. So the next thing that's gonna go in here is some mushrooms. And we're just gonna cook it all together. And we want those mushrooms to give up their water. And that's not gonna take too terribly long. And while that's happening, we're gonna go ahead and pull our pasta off and get it into our water. And we got to make sure that this pasta doesn't stick together, so we are going to give it a quick stir and let that come back to a boil. Those tomatoes are doing really nice in there, along with the mushrooms. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to get a little seasoning in there, get some salt in there, and a little pepper. And I'm gonna put a little bit of zucchini. And if you'll pay attention to the noodles, they're floating. And what we're looking for is that water to start foaming up really good. The next thing I'm going to put in there is some stems from our garden Swiss chard. And they have a really beautiful woody taste to them. And it's going to round this out very nicely because we're going to have the sweet from the tomatoes and the earthy from the mushrooms, that vibrant zucchini, and then that chard is going to go in there and give it nicely rounded out. Caught my rag on fire. Give my pasta a stir. So a lot's happening really quickly. I'm going to get a couple cloves of roasted garlic in there, and then I'm going to turn that down. And the last thing I'm going to do in there is add some white wine just to create a bit of a pan sauce. Now I'm not going to break up that roasted garlic too much. I just want to have those nice cloves in there. It's already cooked down and nice and sweet and mellow. So that'll be like the prize at the bottom of the Cracker Jack box. I'm gonna move this out of the way. Check my pasta again. Ah, beautiful. Right. So the last thing that's going to go in here is just a little bit of Swiss chard out of the garden. And we just want that to wilt down. And to promote that wilting, I'm going to add a little bit of white wine. Get a little more salt and pepper in there. And then we'll pull those noodles out. We don't need a whole lot of wine. We just want it to help steam out those vegetables and kind of start creating a sauce. Everything's wilting down nicely, and I'm going to turn this down now. So at this point, our pasta should be ready. We've got a really nice foaming action happening on the water. And I'm going to get my strainer and pull that out and set this aside for the plate up. And we may use some of this pasta water to thicken up our pan sauce. That starchy water really helps a lot. But those noodles are nice and wet as well. Get everything in there, and we're just going to toss this. I'm going to get some of that water in there. Some of my spoons out. And we're just going to spoon some of that water in there. A couple of tablespoons is really all you need. We don't want that pasta sticking in there, and we want to create that nice sauce effect. And then the last thing I'm going to do is turn this back on, and I'm going to let it simmer for just a second, just to cook down some of that water, let that sauce thicken up a little bit. Let those flavors come together. And then we'll go ahead and put this on a plate. And put some Parmesan on there and garnish it with our crispy bacon lardons. We'll be right back and we'll look at the finished plate. All right, we're gonna go ahead and plate this guy up. We've got a nice presentation bowl. I'm just gonna spin some of these noodles out and set them in there. Give them some height, and then I'm going to pick out some of our garnish. The tomatoes, the chard, the garlic, the zucchini, all of those beautiful vegetables that are abundant in the summer. We really want to feature those. Get those on top. Put this back. I'm going to grab our crispy bacon lardons. Put a few of those on top. And a little bit of Parmesan cheese. Really nice, very simple summer fresh pasta preparation. Hope you guys enjoy the segment. We're gonna be right back and we're gonna do raviolis next. So the next pasta objective we're gonna work on is making raviolis. And I have to start making a filling before I can make the raviolis. So what I'm gonna do is a very simple mushroom filling, like French country style duxelles. I've got some minced up mushrooms here. I've got a saute pan getting nice and hot. I'm gonna get those in there with a little bit of oil. And the mushrooms are gonna absorb all of that oil really, really quickly, but that's fine because they'll re-release it once they give up their water. And we're gonna cook these mushrooms way, way down. And we want this nice high heat. And we're gonna add to this aromatics. So here I have some confit shallots, and these are poached in olive oil for about 12 hours. So they're nice and soft, not mushy, but soft. And they're gonna add a really nice aromatic quality. And if you're not familiar with shallots, they have the best qualities of both onion and garlic. Great for cooking. I've got some fresh herbs here. I've got some thyme, some rosemary, some parsley, some oregano. I'm gonna add that to give it a nice savory quality. And then white wine, salt, pepper, and a little chili flakes. And once this is cooked down, I'm gonna finish it with a little ricotta cheese and a whole egg. Now the whole egg in the mixture is gonna help bind everything so that when these raviolis cook, when you cut them, the filling doesn't just ooze out. So we'll go through that process later. If you wanna take a look at these onions, they're sweating down really nicely. They're starting to get some color. They've shrunk tremendously. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and get all of these shallots in there. And just let that heat do its job. I want everything to cook down nicely. It's okay if the shallots start getting a little bit of color. That just tells us that the flavors will be there. I'm gonna get a little salt and pepper in here at this point. You typically wanna wait till the mushrooms steam out or give up their water before you start adding salt to them. That way they absorb it better and your mushrooms aren't too salty at the end of the process. Any big chunks you can just break down. And this filling is going to be real simply just spooned into our pasta raviolis. Now there's several different methods we can use to make raviolis. I'll try to go through a couple of them with you. We can either cut the pasta sheet into pieces and fill each piece individually like a tortelloni, or we can do sheet pastas and just fill those up and then cover it with another sheet of pasta. All right, my herbs are in there. I'm gonna get a little white wine in there and some chili flakes. Where's my chili flakes? I hid them from me. Sorry about that. This will give it a little bit of spice. We don't want it too spicy, so that's just about 1/8 of a teaspoon of that. Just a little sprinkle, because we want this to be a really lively filling. One thing I like to put in these is lemon zest. It really brings out the flavor of the dairy from the ricotta. Wonderful addition. All right, so now just a splash of white wine. And then I'm gonna turn this down and let it simmer for a few minutes. What that white wine is gonna do is it's gonna brighten and acidify this filling, but it also helps deglaze the pan and get all of that fond off the bottom of the pan, which is that intensified flavor that we really want in here, because there's gonna be so little of this filling in each of the raviolis that it really needs to have a big, big flavor at the end of the process. All right? So I'm gonna turn this down a little more. and then we'll come back and check on this in a little bit and finish it up. Our water's boiling and we're gonna go in with our raviolis now. And I like to be a little more gentle with these than I would with a regular pasta, because that filling, we don't want anything to happen to that. Now the cooking time on these is roughly the same as the fresh pasta, but remember the thickness of the pasta is really gonna be what matters. So probably about 3 minutes on that. And while that's going, I'm gonna start the brown butter. So I just have a saute pan warming up. I'm gonna get some butter in there. And that's about 2-3 tablespoons. And I don't want to cook this so fast and hot that the butter immediately burns, but I want it to brown. I want to smell that kind of nutty aroma. And then once my raviolis are done, I'm going to put them in there, toss it, a little salt and pepper, a little Parmesan cheese, and then we'll plate those up for you. If you look at the raviolis, they're floating up nicely. They've swollen tremendously already, and they are bobbing up to the surface, and we're going to look for that water to get a little foamy. Now remember, that pasta is a lot thicker than that fettuccine was, so we're going to get it a little bit extended on the cooking time, but that's fine. That'll give our butter time to brown up. Like I said, those raviolis would be perfectly appropriate to serve with a pomodoro or tomato sauce, bolognese, an Alfredo. It doesn't matter. That's one of the great things about raviolis, is they're very versatile. All right, so let me point your attention to the butter. It's starting to brown up. See that foaming action that's happening? That's exactly what we're looking for. That little bit of browning in the bottom of the pan. Getting that nutty aroma. I'm gonna let this cook for another couple seconds, and then I'm gonna pull this off until those raviolis are ready. See that beautiful browning at the bottom of the pan? It's exactly what we're looking for. So I'm gonna set that aside to where it doesn't overcook. I'm gonna keep my flame hot, because once those raviolis come out, I wanna get that nice and hot together, season it, hit it with some cheese, and put it on a plate. All right? I've got my skimmer attachment here. There we go. I'm going to use this to check my raviolis. They look really nice. None of them have busted open. No cracks, no tears. That one that I accidentally tore, nicely sealed. There it is. No problems with that. We just put that one face down for the guest, right? And the edges are starting to curl on these, which is indicative of them getting ready. When the edges start to get that kind of lasagna noodle curl, that's when you know they're almost done. And I'm going to use a little bit of the pasta water as almost a thickening agent when I toss this with the brown butter. It's going to help just get a nice coating on everything. You just want to be careful when you're getting that pasta water into a pan that it doesn't splatter and pop or flame up on you. What I'm doing here is I'm flipping these raviolis so that both sides cook evenly. If the top side is exposed outside of the pot or above the surface of the water, it may not cook as evenly. So you can push them down, you can flip them over, you can do whatever right? So these guys are getting done. Those edges are curling nicely. I'm going to start warming that butter up again. I don't want it to cook anymore because it'll burn, but I want it to be warm when I put these raviolis in. Okay, so start putting them in. Let's see that pasta water, the carbohydrates in there are going to help thicken up that butter sauce, almost like a beurre fondue. And then we'll hit that with some Parmesan cheese. We can turn off our water now. We'll hit that with a little bit of Parmesan cheese and get those on a plate. Gently toss those. A little salt and pepper. See how nicely those are simmering in there? It's beautiful. Make sure we get that sauce all over them, nice and coated. If you need to use the skimmer to flip, go ahead. That way, by using that pasta water in there, this dish isn't going to be too greasy, and it'll be a nice, kind of fun little appetizer that your guests can share. All right? And by continuing to cook these raviolis in there, they're absorbing that really nice kind of saucy consistency water. I'm going to get that Parmesan cheese in there now, give them a final toss, and then get them on a plate. You don't want to be too vigorous when you're doing this because these can tear open. All right. Oh, I just made a mess. And there we go. Let's get these plated up. Let me bring my plate over for you guys to see. Get a quick wipe. And we will start layering these on a plate. Now, if you're using tongs for this, make sure not to use the tongs on the center of the ravioli. That thinner pasta will definitely tear open. And we will get 5 on a plate. And those irregular edges don't look too bad, but we've got a nice coating on them. I would garnish this with just a little fresh basil, chopped parsley. You could even do a line of a tomato sauce or a balsamic sauce, whatever you like. So hope you guys enjoyed Fresh Pasta Part 1. We're going to do another one of these with the extruded pasta, and that's the machine-made pasta. Again, thanks for joining us. Let us know what you want to see next time. Always love hearing from you guys, seeing your comments. Remember, like us, follow us, share us, and we'll see you next time. I'm Chef Rosser. Thanks again from El Paso Community College Culinary Arts.